Hello, this video is for IXL Activity A1.H.2. It is titled the Distributive Property, and the 3-character code for this activity is Bravo Hotel Lima. Alright, distributive property. Exactly what is the distributive property? Well, we've been talking about properties of multiplication and addition, and we've done some properties. In this particular activity, we're looking particularly just at the distributive property. So distributive property, what is it? Well, years ago, I used to deliver newspapers, and they would give me a whole bunch of newspapers. They were identical newspapers. They were the exact same newspaper, or they were copies of each other. That is to say, they all said the same thing. So I had to deliver that same newspaper to each house. So I would take that newspaper and I'd drop it off at each house. So I would take the newspaper and give it to the first house and then also to the next one. And to be quite honest, it wasn't myself that was doing it. It was my children. They'd jump in and out of the car as we go down the street. Minivan, doors on both sides, had the doors open, had them latched back so they looked like door gunners in a Huey helicopter in Vietnam. Only instead of shooting machine guns, they were jumping in and out of the car, throwing newspapers up on porches. So we delivered the same newspaper to every single house. So we were in the distribution business. We were distributing something to each house that was on the street. So the distributive property is pretty much the same concept, where the number that is outside of the parentheses is like the newspaper, and the numbers that are inside the parentheses, well, that's kind of like the houses. So I'm going to go ahead and get my arrows out of the way here so I got some room to do some calculations. And we're going to take the 4, that is the newspaper, and we're going to deliver it to each of the houses, which is the 1 and the positive 6D. So this, and remember, this is multiplication in between the 4 and the parentheses. We have no operation symbol, so we recognize that this means to multiply. So this means to multiply 4 times 1, so I'm going to do 4 times 1, and also 4 times positive 6, or we could just say plus 4 times 6. 6 what? 6D. We can't forget the variable there. Got to take the variable along for the ride. So in this case, let's multiply 4 times 1 to get 4. And let's multiply 4 times 6 to get 24. And we still need that variable D. The variable goes along for the ride. So we end up with 4 plus 24D. Now this step that we see right here is not necessarily mandatory to write out. We could just simply have said, okay, 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 6 is 24, and remember the variable D goes along for the ride, so we got to include the variable D there, and end up with 4 plus 24D. Let's look at another example of this. 2 times the quantity of 1 plus t. Notice how I read the parentheses as the quantity of. So if I were saying to somebody, somebody said 7 times the quantity of 6 plus t. Okay, I'd be like 7 times, okay, the quantity of, that means parentheses, 6 plus t, right? So whenever we read the parentheses signs, we use the phrase the quantity of. So 2 times the quantity of 1 plus t. So we're going to distribute that 2 into both the 1 and the variable t. So that means I'm going to have 2 times 1. I'm going to add that to 2 times t. This is going to give me a result of 2 times 1 is 2, and 2 times t is 2t. So I have 2 plus 2t. The next one, I have 2 times 2 and 2 times 6x. So let's go ahead and try it without actually writing that out. 2 times 2 is 4. And 2 times, and this is a positive 6, that's positive times positive. So 2 times 6 is 24. Or no, 12, sorry. I was thinking 4. And the x goes along for the ride. So if we did this the long way and said 2 times 2 plus 2 times 6x, we would end up with 2 times 2 is 4. And 2 times 6 is 12. And the x goes along for the ride, and we would end up with the same 4 plus 12x. So that's the process of using the distributive property to distribute something in. Now on the next one, we're going to have something that's a little bit different. Now they want us to factor it. Notice before they were telling us to simplify the expression and we had to factor in that value that was outside the parentheses into what was inside the parentheses. Well, now you can see that our parentheses are gone. So what they're asking us to do is to do this in reverse. It's like pull the newspapers back from the house, if you want to think of it that way. Well, first we have to realize what is the newspaper, what is that value that needs to come out. So let's go ahead. I'm going to write this as 36Q. I'm going to rewrite the problem plus 45. Okay. Now, we have to figure out factors that 36 and 45 have that are in common. And also, please note, write your answer as a product with a whole number greater than 1. Well, a whole number is greater than 1 means that we cannot use a negative number. We can't pull out a negative value. It has to be a positive value. That way, if it were positive, then it would definitely be greater than 1. So 36 and 45. Well, if we think about 45, 45 really doesn't have that many factors other than 1 and 45, right? What are they? It's like 9 times 5, right? 9 times 5. And so we could rewrite 45 as that. Now, 36 doesn't have a factor of 5 in it, but it does have a factor of 9 in it, right? 9 times 4 is 36. So let's go ahead and write this as 9 times 4 times Q, right? Remember that Q is going to be in there. Can't take that out. Now, so what can we take out of both of these? Well, we can take out the 9, right? So let's go ahead and pull out the 9. And then let's go ahead and put what we have left over. Here we have 4Q. And add that to, what do we have left over here? The 5. Now, we want to double check. 4 and 5, do they share any common factors other than 1? No, they don't. So we probably simplified this as far as possible. So our answer is going to be 9 times the quantity of 4Q plus 5. So we're basically doing like reverse distributive property. Before starting off, they ask us to distribute the value into the parenthesis. Now we're distributing that value out of the parenthesis. We have to do that by identifying common factors that each of the terms have. On the next one, we have 90y minus 20. And let's see. Well, 10 seems to be a common factor with these, right? Definitely. So let's try 10. 10 times 9 times y. And this case, because it has to be a positive number that we're pulling out, and this is a minus, let's just put our minus sign there. Let's just do it that way. And then 20 is 2 times 10, right? So we can take a 10 out of both these. So let's go ahead and pull our 10 out. And what does that leave us? Well, here we're left with 9 times y and minus sign. And what are we left here? We're left with a 2. So it's going to be 10 times the quantity of 9y minus 2. Now you can always double check your answer, right? What we just did is we're basically doing reverse distributive property. So what if we just turned it right back around and we kind of pulled the newspaper out of the house? What if we go ahead and put the newspaper back in the house and we think of it that way? And indeed, if we go ahead, the 10 times 9 is 90, the y goes along for the ride, and 10 times negative 2 is negative 20 or minus 20, however you want to look at it, and we would end up right back at the same thing we started with. On the next one, we have 6c minus 15d. So let's go ahead and look at what they have in common. 3 seems to be a good number, right? 2 times 3 times c is one of them. And minus, and then 15 times d. Well, 15 we need to write with a factor of 3. That's going to be what? 3 times 5 times d. So let's see what we can take out. We can definitely take out a 3. So let's take out the 3 there. What do we have left over? The 2 and the c for 2 times c, our subtraction sign. And we have a 5 and a d left over. 5 and d. And 2c and 5d have no common factors, so we know that we've got all the way down to the most simplified form that we can. 3 times the quantity of 2c minus 5d. On the next one, 18c plus 14. What about 2? If I have 2 times 9 times c, and I could rewrite 14 as 2 times 7, right? So let's pull the 2 out of each of them. The 2 is what we're going to take out. We're left with the 9 and the c, so 9 times c, our plus sign, and then we're left with the 7 over there. And 9 and 7 share no common factors other than 1, so we've simplified it as far as we can. The 2 is all we can pull out, so 2 times the quantity of 9c plus 7. Okay, here we have 3 different factors right here. And I think I'm going to do this a certain way because I want to demonstrate something. I'm going to actually intentionally get this correct, but not fully correct. So let's go ahead and see how that works. So 36, 27, and 9. You might think, oh, they all share a common factor of 3. So let's pull a 3 out. So 3 times, what is that, 12, right, is 36, and times w, and my plus sign, 3 times, what is it, 9? 3 times 9. Oh, and I got to include that x there, times x, minus, and then 9 is 3 times 3. So I'm going to pull 3 out of all these, correct? So I pull 3 out. Now what do I have left? 12w plus, I have a 9x here, 9x, minus, and I have a 3 left over. Now, are we completely finished? Well, not really, because 12, 9, and 3 all have a common factor of 3. I could pull those out even further, and let's go ahead and do that. So let's have this as 3 times, because that's multiplying there. 12 is going to be 3 times 4 times w, plus the 9 is going to be 3 times 3 times x, and minus, and then the 3 here, and I have to have something left over, so I'll put 3 times 1, right? So, because I have to have something left over, I can't just leave that as empty. I can't make it a 0. That would make it totally different. So now I'm going to pull a 3 out of each of these. So I pull an additional 3 out, 3 times 3, right, times, and then what's left over here, I have a 4w, plus, I have a 3x left over, 3x, and I have a minus 1 left over. Now I can simplify this 3 times 3 right here and put that as 9. But instead, let's go ahead and go back and look at, I just wanted to demonstrate how if you pull a factor out and then you look again and you realize, wait a second, I could find another factor to pull out of there. So let's suppose that we realize, oh, 9 is a factor of all of these. So 9 times, what is that, 4? Yep, times w, and plus, in this case, 9 times 3 times x, minus, and in this case, 9, and remember, we have to have something to leave behind, so that's going to be a 1 there. Now we can pull out the 9s, right? And 9 is what we're going to pull out. I'm left with 4w, and plus sign. Here I'm left with 3x, and here I'm left with minus the 1. So I end up with 9 times the quantity of 4w plus 3x minus 1. And I could always double check that, right? Distribute that 9 back in. 9 times 4 is 36. The w goes along for the ride. 9 times 3 is 27, and the x goes along for the ride. And 9 times negative 1 is indeed negative 9. So it all checks out. Now let's see if we can start doing this without all the writing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. 36q minus 18r minus 30. So what do they all have in common? Let me see, 2 works, right? But I think 6 works also. Yeah, they're all even, so I know 2 works. But what about 6? 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 2 is 18. 6 times 5 is 30. So let's go ahead and try to pull out a 6. And what's left over here? Well, 6 times 6 is 36, so that would be 6. And I also have the q minus, if I take factor 6 out of 18, I'm left over with 2, and I still need the variable r. And 6 times 5 is 30, so if I pulled 6 out, I'd be left with the 5. And now, 6, 2, and 5, do they all have any common factors? Indeed, they do not, so this is our final answer. 6 times the quantity of 6q minus 2r minus 5. And the final one here, wow, 4 of them. Now, I don't think you'll come across any that have variables that can be pulled out. If I recall whenever I did this, they both had, let me write something out here. Let's say I had 28x plus 14x minus 35x plus 28x. Well, notice they all have an x that would be able to be pulled out, so we'd also pull an x out of all of them. I'll go ahead and actually solve this one, and then we'll actually do the real one here, just in case you run into something like this. So what do they all have in common? It looks like 7, right? 7 times 4 is 28, 7 times 2 is 14, 7 times 5 is 35, so it looks like 7 is going to be there. And notice they all have an x that I can take out, so I'm going to take out the x as well. So 7 times 4 is 28, so I'd be left over with a 4 there. So we took out the 7 and the x. And here 7 times 2 is 14, so I'd be left with a 2. And also I took out the x, so that's not there. And minus, and 7 times 5 is 35, so I'd be left with a 5 here. And I took out the x, so I don't need it. And finally, again, I would have another 4. So, and then at that rate, we just took all the variables out. That would actually simplify. Now I see why they're probably not doing all this. We could actually add all this together. 4 is 8, plus the 2 is 10, subtract 5. We would actually end up with 5, and we could say this whole thing equals 35, and we could actually get a final answer. So you may not run into anything like that. I just wanted you to realize that if in the event that they all had the same variable, that variable can be factored out as well. So let's look at the 28x plus 14y minus 35z plus 28. Well, we already said that 7 is what we're going to take out, right? So let's pull 7 out of there. 7 times 4 is 28, so the 4 is left over, and we still have that x there. And 7 times 2 is 14, so we'd be left with a 2, and the variable y still remains. Put our subtraction sign. 7 times 5 is 35, so we'd be left with the 5, and the z still remains. And then whenever we factor 7 out of 28, we would be left with 4 behind as well. Now, we cannot combine any of this stuff that's inside here, like I did with the other one, where I eliminated all the variables, and all I was left with were constants, and I could actually combine all the constants. But none of these are the same term. The 4x is in terms of x to the first, 2y is in terms of y to the first, negative 5z is in terms of z to the first, and 4 is just a constant. So I can't combine any of those. So my final answer will be 7 times the quantity of 4x plus 2y minus 5z plus 4. All right. So those are all of my examples for IXL Activity A1.H.2 Distributive Property. Good luck with your activity.